Thanks for pressing play on another video. We hope you're having fun. We're having a great time, and we are going to dive into this idea of what it looks like to create a covenant that's value-based to define the invitation into ministry. And also, hopefully, to help you have some solid conversations as things get a little more rough sometimes in ministry as well. But just maybe to pose things and get things going, what does the invitation look like at your ministry? How do you guys choose to frame that?
So I am excited to hear more from Sean McClellan on this, because he is one that has kind of helped shape my own worship ministry covenant at Grace Church. We had something along the lines early on that we had a kind of just a written letter from the pastor, and then here's some expectations, but over the past few years ago kind of updated that and gave some more clarity to the expectations. Here's our vision as a ministry. Here are some expectations. Here's some values that we hold to be like, these are our top values in ministry. Here's a scripture passage that's kind of like our vision. This is what we're moving toward. And then just having that in writing, and then allowing our ministry volunteers to sign off on it and say, not only am I saying that I've seen this and read this, but that I am in agreement and that we're making a covenant together, that we're on the same path and journeying together. And so I've found that it has brought great clarity to the Grace Church worship ministry.
Yeah, for us, it is the invitation. There's a very brief process where they're invited to kind of observe a rehearsal, meet with me one-on-one. We talk through a lot of the covenant kinds of things. And then they participate in their first rehearsal, with the idea of clarifying expectations, knowing what they're getting into, make sure they feel comfortable with the pace. For example, with our rhythm section, a lot of the times we use the Nashville number system. Want to make sure that they feel comfortable with that. Or if I need to supplement resources another way because they're not comfortable with the system, that I know that ahead of time. We don't have anybody audition to be a part of the ministry team. Sometimes I wish we did, but that we make room for everybody as long as they feel comfortable and they are in agreement with all of our values, the expectations, and they're on board with all of that. We'll find a place for them to serve. That ministry covenant can often be that filter as well. It has been on a couple of occasions where communicate to them, this is what the expectation is, especially regarding rehearsal attendance, things like that. It's not always convenient. Our church is very largely a drive-in church where people live 20 to 30 to 40 minutes away. So it's not always convenient to attend a midweek rehearsal on a weeknight. So that covenant has been an easy thing to filter out, like, okay, I know that I'm not gonna be able to commit to this. And then there's no hard feelings with that. So it's been able to protect relationship as well.
Sean, at Bethany First Church, the way we have different ministry areas within the worship arts team, and we have a choir, we have a praise team that's more out front, we have band, we have orchestra, and all of the areas other than choir, there is a tryout required. Just to kind of see where they are skill level wise, and to see if we need to match them up with somebody. Maybe they need a little more work. They're in our youth group perhaps, and they play keyboard and they want to hone their skills a little bit in that regard. But a ministry covenant is given out to every person that really outlines the mission of our church. Talks about the Church of the Nazarene as a whole, because perhaps they're just coming into it. They've never had any experience in knowing what the Church of the Nazarene stands for and what we're all about. But it also outlines that every single person that's joining our ministry that has a desire to be a part of this team, you need to know that you're a worship leader. Because if you're on the platform, whether you're playing second keys or whether you're singing out front or you're playing trombone, you're a worship leader. You're actually being seen on the platform, and there are expectations that come with that. There are expectations for you to live a life that is God-centered outside the walls of this church. And so while we understand that people mess up and we all fall short, that is an expectation that's outlined there. And it's important for people to know and understand that up front, and to be, pretty firm about that. Just to say, this is who we are. We would love to have you as a part of the team, but this is who we are.
Yeah, I think those things are all incredible. I think we've got to outline codes of Christian conduct. We've got to outline expectations and how people sign up for this and that. And I think it takes ministry to another level when you have clearly defined values, more than those that just hang on the wall, right? Like, hey, so at Oro Valley, it's community, it's depth, passion, and it's joy. So those things hang on the wall, but they don't just hang on the wall. And I'm always talking to our worship leaders, and I'm like, if all the values do is hang on the wall, then it means nothing. So instead, how do your values shape who you are? Because that's the nature of covenant, right? It shapes who we are. It's a two-way beneficial street. It's relational. It's, hey, we are all changed as we do this together. So these things have to be upheld. And over the years, I've found it's way better to uphold shared values than it is to argue about specific things, because people love to argue about specific things. So if we can always bring it back to shared values. And so I'm wondering if maybe somebody has an example of how living out shared values and upholding shared values looks like in your ministry setting.
For us, one way it's come up even recently, I think I shared in an earlier video, we're trying to be more intergenerational in our services. And that means we've got sometimes kids in the choir. Maybe on that day they're a little dysregulated. Behavior seems to be a bit of an issue, and all of a sudden, which I don't blame our adults for. All of a sudden, they've become responsible for students that they don't know, for students that they don't have a relationship with, and all of a sudden, instead of just singing their song, they're needing to monitor and help correct behavior and things like that. And so that was actually a time when we needed to shift our covenant to include some more of that language in the vision of what we're trying to do. Because we could all agree on the fact that we wanted everybody to have a place who's being represented on the platform from the congregation. We wanted everybody represented. Everybody belongs here. Until it was a disruption. So instead of arguing about, okay, well, who is going to be responsible when the kids get out of line? Who is going to be responsible for correcting this? Who's going to be responsible? All of a sudden, we sound worse because the kids don't know the music as well. They're not as strong singers. But instead of arguing about those specific things, we could point back to, no, we're intergenerational here. This is what we're about. We're not a performance choir. That's not what we're not striving for perfection here. We're striving for faithful worship. And so that was a really, really helpful thing for us.
Yeah, that's awesome, because good vision is, as we've said earlier, it's attracting, but it's also repelling, right? So this doesn't have to be for you, and that's okay. But if you don't have the invitation clearly defined, that's where you start to get into trouble, right? So I know that you had talked about some values. You have a story of like how living by your values has helped ministry in your setting, Sharon?
Yeah, so as a church plant, we're starting from the ground up, right? And it really is a whosoever will, let them come some days, it feels like. But one particular, there was a particular young woman who really had the heart to serve, but not necessarily where she wanted to serve. Maybe her ability or her commitment level didn't match. And so instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, okay, let's figure out when you give us something that you're interested in or consider, and it's taken like 4 tries, we think we found her thing. And I think our values should not be such where they keep people out or give limited opportunity for people. Yes, we uphold our values, but we have to remember that those values must also live in the context of community. And so if our values is something we're trying to strive for that go beyond the community we're in, nobody's ever going to reach it, right? And so what does that look like for your space? So what works in Nick's church is awesome, but I probably wouldn't do the same thing in our church, right? And no one would probably, at where we are, where people are on their journeys, they probably wouldn't be able to live up to that necessarily. And so it becomes super important as you think about, all of the ideas that we share in this space, think about your context and what works. Again, Jordan says, we want to be an intergenerational church. So we're not going to be so hung up on every note being hit, because that's not going to happen if we're going to have little kids in our choir, right? And so we really do have to think about our context and how those values then are shaped and displayed and then embodied, right? Because I agree, if they're up on the wall, they're really artwork. It's artwork,
yeah,
right? But it's when we do it and live it that we start to embody that. So what does that look like in your context? And every context is different, and that's okay. And I think that's the thing that has been incredibly life-giving. I have served in 3 very different contexts. And the values, yes, we all share those 3. Nazarene, we are Christian people, we are holiness people, we are a missional people. But then there's a couple others that go in those contexts. And in each 3 of those spaces, they have been different based on who is in the building and who is coming into this space where we are doing life together. And so learning that becomes so important. It becomes super important.
That's what I was thinking about, serving in a few different contexts, how different our process has been for somebody from the moment they raise their hand and say, hey, I'm interested in serving, to them actually being on the team, or even how different it is when it comes to those difficult conversations and holding people accountable, or what that looks like from participation based on their faith journey, or what their participation looks like based on their skills and ability. And I think where I find myself currently, it's just different. It's another different place, and we are actively working on what does it look like to have clarity in that process from somebody raising their hand. I think the most beneficial thing that I've had in the past has been the covenant and having clarity over what does it mean to serve in this ministry. What are you agreeing to? And what am I as the leader, or we as leaders, agreeing to? What can they expect of us, and what can we expect of them? A covenant together. So that way, there's mutual accountability. They can say, well, wait a second, I thought that you were going to as the leader, and we can do the same as we do that. But I also think, what does the missional component look like? So we want people to be able, the arts are naturally missional. There'll be people that'll show up and it'll be their first time, and they'll be like, hey, I play this instrument. I want to join. Okay, let's get together. Let's have coffee. Let's talk about like where you're at on the journey and why you want to serve and what that looks like for you. But at what point can people, because in university settings, in more community church settings that have a massive Celebrate Recovery program that feeds an influx in the congregation versus just established long-time churches. What does it look like to include people on different places on their journey of faith? And what does that look like with accountability? And I think the context is so critical in understanding where does your lead pastor fall in that conversation, and what are the things that he thinks are important with values and where people are at and being on the platform. Because Nick's exactly right. You are a worship, and this is something that I'm trying to really help shape our folks, is you are a worship leader. It doesn't matter if you hold a mic in your hand and you're in the choir. It doesn't matter what instrument you play or what capacity. You are a worship leader, and that's our primary task, and people see you as that. And so really shifting that mindset of value and how that speaks into how we navigate all these complex decisions.
Yeah, so these values, they're culture shapers, right? So it's one thing to have a great onboarding process, which every one of us should have. It's another thing to say, hey, we value community, so as a part of your onboarding, you're going to serve the ministry in the most mundane things before we even think about scheduling you, right? So it's this idea of, we're being discipled together in the process. It's like, this is the invitation, this is what it looks like. Do you want to? Because here's the invitation, and we want you here. But also, when it comes to a point where we get into a conversation, and maybe it doesn't go the way that we want it to. Somebody says something to someone that's just plain not nice, right? We just had a long video about that, so we don't need to get into all of that. But if you have a value that's shaped your culture, and you can pose the question, can you do this with joy? Then the answer to that question should not be, well, how much joy, right? Like, it shouldn't be this thing that we're like splitting hairs on. It is this invitation to say, hey, we're doing this together. And if worship arts ministry is not the place where you can serve from joy, let's find the place where you can find that joy, right? So we all know worship arts ministry, as much as we have a clearly defined invitation, it's not for everyone, and that's okay. Because we can't all be a foot or a head or a shoulder or an elbow, right? But what I will say as we wrap up is that, man, if we can take these values and they can shape what we do, it can define the invitation to ministry, then it really creates a pleasant place where people can land and feel invited to a space where they're loved, cared for, seen, and then ultimately found a deep place of ministry from which they can serve and feel fulfilled.